Hey everyone, how's it going? Welcome to yet another Friday Reads. This will probably be my next to last Friday Reads of the year. Maybe also my last, I don't know. I'm not actually entirely certain I'll do a Friday Reads next week, but at this point I'm planning to do it. It'll be Christmas Eve, so it's a bit of an odd day, but I hope I will. And I will say farewell then to Friday Reads at least. There will be one more Vlogmas video after that, but after my last Vlogmas video will be my last video of this year. And my first video will probably be sometime in the middle of next month, in January. But anyway, I've had a pretty decent week, taking it easy. Except for today. I did not take it easy today, because I spent most of today grading papers. So my students had to submit their final papers for the methods class that I've been teaching, and I spent half the day just getting through them all. Before, I thought that I would set aside maybe 5 or so papers to grade per day over the course of the next few days and get them graded that way, and then submit the final grades the day that the final grades are due, but I just decided this morning that I would rather just plow through all of them in one day, just get it over with, and I did, and I was successful. So I'm feeling pretty good about that. That means I'm officially on break for the next 4 weeks or so that's wonderful. It's been a rough semester, so having a good chunk of time off will be great for me to recharge before next semester begins. And I think next semester should be better. I won't be teaching next semester myself. I'll still be TAing, and I have a couple classes that I'm taking, but I will not be teaching, and I think that should significantly lower my stress levels. So that will be great, and means that I should be consistently making videos on BookTube. So anyway, I will cut it with the preamble and get into the books. And so I'll start with my two big books I'm chipping away at. I have When the Light of the World Was Subdued, Our Songs Came Through. Not much to report on that, but I'm still working on it. I'm definitely taking it into the new year because I'm not even halfway through it still. And then there's Frederick Douglass, Prophet of Freedom by David Blight. Not too much to report on this, it's still great. We're in the period of history where there's a lot of discussion of Reconstruction and how that went and the sort of collapse of Reconstruction. And that is all very, very interesting, and it's also really depressing because I feel like in Reconstruction after the Civil War, the United States really missed out on an opportunity to create a society that could have been a lot more equal than it turned out to be and still is to this day. Reconstruction was an opportunity to turn around and really change the country in a significant way, and it all just fell apart as southern states were allowed back into the Union with very little having to be done to make up for the fact that they had seceded, with Democrats, who at the time were much more conservative than they are now, gaining control of the House of Representatives, and so on and so forth. So it's all really sad to read about the collapse of Reconstruction. It's interesting, too, learning about some of the disappointing views that Frederick Douglass himself held. He was not a perfect person, and I don't necessarily think a human being has to be perfect to be worthy of some degree of admiration, and I think it's important for us to talk about the ways in which people we admire are flawed, while still acknowledging that there were aspects of them to be admired. I think of that in a lot of ways in the same way Abraham Lincoln. He, too, was probably a more imperfect person in many ways than Frederick Douglass even. But I think still we can admire him while discussing and taking seriously the ways in which he was profoundly problematic. And Frederick Douglass, I think, is not problematic in the way Lincoln was. But for example, he actually held rather anti-Catholic views and also said some questionable things about Native Americans that certainly are disappointing to learn about if you're an admirer of Frederick Douglass. And so that's a little bit sad to learn about, but again, it just adds a bit of a layer to the portrait of this man who, again, was not perfect, but I think is still quite fascinating and worthy in some way of admiration in many ways. So anyway, so it's still a great, great book. Another book that I finished, that I talked about a lot last Friday, was A Christmas Carol. Sorry, I had to go and grab it from my backpack because I was traveling with it. But I finished A Christmas Carol last weekend by Charles Dickens, and I was expecting to enjoy it because I love many film adaptations of A Christmas Carol, and so I was expecting to like the story, and I did. A lot of those adaptations are extremely faithful to the story, so there was nothing tremendously unexpected in the plot. But what I was really just bowled over by in this book was just the writing. There are just some beautiful passages in the book, some beautiful passages of prose, some of the best prose I've read all year, and that was just a joy to read. Some of the dialogue, as I said last Friday, is also just superb. It's just lightning dialogue, I think. And my hope is that, having read A Christmas Carol now and loved it, sorry, you're probably hearing that Bessie just got her food. She has an automatic feeder that spurts out food for her once a day, and it just went off. So my hope is that having read now A Christmas Carol and liked it so much will make me more excited for other Dickens to read, because I have a bit of a rocky relationship with Dickens in the past, where I did not like Great Expectations very much, and then I liked David Copperfield but didn't love it. But now, having read this and loved it, I'm hoping it'll make me more excited to read Bleak House especially, and also A Tale of Two Cities. I think probably A Tale of Two Cities I will really like. I think it's probably maybe the next Dickens I'll go for. But anyway, yeah, this was great. I don't have too much more commentary on it beyond just that it really is wonderful. Definitely my favorite Dickens I've read so far, but I've only read 3, David Copperfield, Great Expectations, and this. So my favorite Dickens doesn't mean that much, because I haven't read that much, but still, great book. Now to move on to the centerpiece of my reading week, the big conquest of the end of my year, and that is this. And it doesn't tell you much because I took the dust jacket off, but this is the Books of Earthsea by Ursula K. Le Guin. So this is 7 books, I believe. So there's A Wizard of Earthsea, The Tombs of Atuan, The Farthest Shore, Tehanu, Tales from Earthsea, and The Other Wind. So I believe that's 1, 2, 3, 4, okay, 6 books. And then there's a piece called A Description of Earthsea, which I believe will be kind of a geographic description of the world that this takes place in. It's a fantasy series. And then there's 4 short stories that take place in this world, the Earthsea world. And then there's an essay at the end by Ursula K. Le Guin called Earthsea Revisioned. And so earlier this year I read The Tombs of Atuan, and last year, in 2020, I read A Wizard of Earthsea. And right now I'm making my way through, I'm going to finish very soon, The Farthest Shore, the 3rd book in the series. And I'm really enjoying The Farthest Shore. So it's hard to kind of describe the plot of the 3rd book in a fantasy series, but basically, the Earthsea series takes place in a world that is largely islands, largely made up of islands, so seafaring is a very important part of a lot of the cultures in this fantastical world. And there are mages in this world, and a mage who we meet in the 1st book in the Earthsea series is named Ged. And the 1st book is all about him when he's very young, but now in the 3rd book he's an old mage. He's actually the archmage of Roke, which is a place where young boys go to get trained as mages. And in this novel, what's happening in the Earthsea universe is that some places in the world are losing magic somehow. And so Ged decides to set out and figure out what's going on, why this is happening. And he takes along with him a young boy named Aaron, or Aaron. I'm actually not sure how you pronounce his name, but Arren is how you spell his name. And so Ged and Aaron are trying to figure out what's going on. Why are certain places in Earthsea losing magic? And also dragons are losing their speech. There are dragons in this world who can talk, and for some reason a lot of dragons are losing their speech, and even some humans, I think, are losing their speech. And so that's kind of the main quest. But what's interesting about this book, and I think about both of the other books in the series, is that even though they have that surface level fantasy quest element, they really are more of an internal journey into the characters themselves, especially in this case into Aaron more than Ged. And that's what I think makes them great, that they're really character studies more than they are just adventure stories. but they are still great adventure stories. But I'm loving the third book even more than the other two. Actually, I'll get into my history with this series in a minute, but this is my favorite of the books so far. It's a lot more philosophical than I expect fantasy books to be. I don't expect fantasy literature to be super philosophical. I do expect that of science fiction books, but not of fantasy books. And so it's cool to see all of these different philosophical themes being explored in this book. And of course, I eat that up like candy, and so I'm loving it. And what's interesting reading this third book and liking it so much more is that when I first started the Earthsea series, when I read the first book, A Wizard of Earthsea, I really actually disliked it. I disliked the writing a lot. I thought the writing was terrible. And so I kind of thought the story was interesting, but just really didn't like the book because of the writing. And then I read the second book, The Tombs of Atuan, which I really liked, which I thought was so interesting. And now I'm reading the third book, and I'm really loving it. And so, having read two subsequent installments, The Tombs of Atuan and the current one, The Farthest Shore, that I've liked so much, makes me wonder about that first installment, A Wizard of Earthsea, and makes me wonder whether I just blew a fuse while reading it somehow, or whether I was just really in the wrong headspace while reading it. Because even though I think the whole idea of being in the right, reading a book at the right time or something like this doesn't hold too much water, I do think that sometimes if you're having certain experiences around the time you read a book, it can really color your view of the book. And around the time when I read A Wizard of Earthsea, there were a lot of things going on that I think may have colored my experience of it. In particular, around the time when I read A Wizard of Earthsea, the last season of Game of Thrones was airing, and the last season of Game of Thrones was a train wreck, was terrible, and I was really salty about it. And so I think that that may have actually colored my experience of A Wizard of Earthsea somehow. And so I think maybe what I'll do when I finish the Earthsea books next year is I will go back and reread that first book as well to just see whether it's a lot better than I remember. Because so many people love A Wizard of Earthsea. So many people do. And I have also heard from more than one reliable source that the Earthsea books get better as they go along. So it could also be my assessment could have been correct. It could have been that Ursula Le Guin just didn't do a good job with that first book, that maybe she grew as a writer between the writing of the first and the writing of the second book, or something like that. But I also can't get out of my head the possibility that I just completely miscalculated when reading that first book. So anyway, that's my big spiel about the Earthsea books. I'm really enjoying it. I'm really looking forward to spending a lot of time with this book. I'm probably not going to finish it before. I'm definitely not going to finish it until the new year. It'll probably be the Books of Earthsea will be the first books that I finish next year. So I'll be working on this for some time, and I'm looking forward to just spending a lot of time with it because I'm enjoying it. So anyway, that is The Farthest Shore. This weekend, I'm going to be finishing The Farthest Shore and starting the fourth book, Tehanu. And I don't really know what Tehanu is about, but we'll see. I'm excited to read it. And then also this weekend, I have an essay in the Collected Essays and Poems of Henry David Thoreau to read. And this one is called Autumnal Tints. And this will be the last of his essays that I read this year. This is a buddy read, I forgot to mention, with Sharon Goforth. This is the last essay of his that we'll read this year. We're going to take 2 weeks off from the book after this week. And then we'll pick up again at the beginning of next year. And then we won't have too many more essays to read at that point. So, anyway, I will read that, and I'll probably report on that next Friday. So, look out for that. But other than that, that is my Friday reads. I hope you enjoyed. Let me know if you've read any of the books I mentioned, and if you have any thoughts on anything else. And I will talk to you all soon. Bye.